If one day you realized you were just a shadow in the very home you grew up in, what would you do? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times, sitting quietly in the corner of the living room, watching my parents proudly boast about my sister as if I never existed. I'm Hannah Collins, 29 years old, born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina, a small southern town where everyone knows each other, where gossip from the market or coffee shop can haunt a family for years. In that place, the image of a perfect family matters more than anything else. And me? I've always been just the shadow of my sister. My sister, Rebecca Collins, 32, is the family's crown jewel. She was a top student, beautiful, confident, and known throughout town as a role model. Every time she achieved something, my parents, Robert and Linda Collins, who run a small accounting firm, would beam with pride, telling friends, colleagues, and neighbors. Meanwhile, I worked hard, tried my best to be noticed, but it was like everything I did vanished into thin air. Every comparison, every praise or criticism always revolved around one axis. Rebecca was the pride, and Hannah was careful but clumsy. I still vividly remember one evening when I was 8. The elementary school held a nature-themed art contest, and to my surprise, I won first place. I brought home a blue certificate, buzzing with excitement, hoping for a hug from Mom, or at least a "good job, Hannah." But when I showed her the certificate, she barely glanced at it and sighed. Drawing's nice, but Rebecca just won the state math gold medal. That's something to be proud of. Her words hit like a bucket of cold water. I stood there silently, crumpling the certificate in my hands. In that moment, I understood. My joy would never be big enough to meet my parents' expectations. My childhood passed like that, with endless comparisons and small scratches on my soul that grew deeper over time. My father, Robert, was a quiet man who avoided conflict, but never took my side. After Mom scolded me, he'd pat my shoulder and say, "Come on, Hannah, let your sister have her moment. Keeping the family peaceful is what matters." So I learned to swallow my feelings. I learned to step back, to be the person in the background for the sake of family harmony. But deep inside, a part of me grew cold. As we grew up, our paths reflected that divide. Rebecca left Asheville for the big city, working for a financial corporation, climbing the ranks fast, and earning praise from the local press as the golden girl. I, on the other hand, after graduating with a marketing degree, chose to stay close to home, working for a small company. Part of it was to save money, but part of it was because I thought I needed to stay to care for my parents, especially when Mom started having dizzy spells from work stress. You might think they'd appreciate that sacrifice. They didn't. To them, my staying only proved my mediocrity, my lack of ambition to leave our small town. In their eyes, I was still the dutiful daughter who could never measure up to her dazzling sister in the big city. I remember one evening clearly. Dad was reading the financial section of the newspaper, and Mom was on the phone with a friend, bragging about Rebecca's latest promotion to project manager. I was in the kitchen, carefully preparing dinner, hoping we could all eat together. When I brought out the chicken stew, Mom put down the phone, looked at me, and said, "Hannah, if you tried as hard as your sister, you'd probably have a better position by now." I stayed silent. It felt like someone was squeezing my heart. I wanted to tell her I worked 10-hour days, that I turned down a promotion at another company to stay near them. But I knew any words I said would be dismissed as excuses. Living in Asheville, I was surrounded by the familiar stares of neighbors and my parents' friends. At church gatherings or weekend fairs, people would ask about me half-heartedly before quickly shifting to praise Rebecca. "That girl's so talented, will she ever run for city council?" Rebecca's truly the gem of the Collins family. I'd force a smile, feeling left behind. For years, I lived in a cycle: work, care for my parents, try to prove myself, and then feel crushed when no one noticed. I never rebelled, never argued. I chose to endure, to be patient. But deep in my heart, one desire never faded: to be recognized, to be loved as a real part of the family. Sometimes I wondered if I disappeared one day, would anyone notice? Or would they feel relieved to be rid of the clumsy shadow in their home? That question kept me up at night. It felt like a prophecy warning me that this conflict would lead to a point of no return. I'm sharing this with you not to complain, but because I believe somewhere out there you might have felt left behind or undervalued in the place that should be your safest haven. And I want you to know you're not alone. My story isn't just about family favoritism. It's about breaking free from that shadow, a journey I never thought I'd have the courage to start. But then one event, my sister's lavish wedding, became the catalyst that changed everything. There are moments in life when you think you're close to acceptance, only to find yourself standing before a locked door. For me, that moment was the lead-up to my sister Rebecca's wedding. I thought if I poured everything into it, if I made it perfect, my parents would finally look at me and say, "You did great, Hannah." I started with the smallest details. I scoured shops in Asheville and even drove to Greenville to pick out flowers and tablecloths. I spent hours comparing prices from wedding vendors, negotiating to save every penny. No one asked me to do it, but I did it with the faint hope that this would be my chance to prove I wasn't useless. Rebecca was different. She sent me curt texts from the city saying things like, "Whatever you think," or "I'm busy, handle it if you can." Not a single thank you, not a word of encouragement. When I suggested creative ideas for the ceremony, she replied coldly, "Just don't make it too tacky." My parents, Robert and Linda, didn't see my efforts either. Once, I carefully handed Mom a detailed plan, schedules, guest lists, menus. She glanced at it for a few seconds before setting it aside like it was meaningless. Rebecca would have done better. Good thing she's making the big decisions, or this would be a mess. I forced a smile, hiding the sting in my chest. I wanted to scream that I was the one doing everything, that every word, every number was crafted by me through sleepless nights. But I stayed silent, as always. To show my love, I used my savings to buy Rebecca a silver sapphire necklace. I knew she'd admired a similar design in a magazine. I imagined her opening the gift, smiling, maybe even hugging me in front of our parents. In that dream, I'd feel like part of the family, even if just for a moment. But reality is never as sweet as dreams. As the wedding approached, I was exhausted. My eyes were shadowed from sleepless nights, my hands rough from cutting paper and gluing invitations. I'd given everything, my energy, my time, my heart. Then, the night before the wedding, in my exhaustion, I forgot a small box of decorations at my apartment. It was just a few glass jars I'd hand-decorated for the table centerpieces. I thought I could grab them quickly, no big deal. But when I walked into my parents' house with the missing box, Mom's eyes darkened. Linda's voice was sharp, each word like a knife. "Hannah, what is this? You forgot something again? Always making us look bad, aren't you?" Dad set his coffee cup down, looking at me like I'd committed an unforgivable sin. "All these years, you've only embarrassed us. Tomorrow is your sister's big day, and you're still proving you're a burden." I stammered, trying to explain. "It's just one box. I'll grab it now. It'll take 10 minutes. But Mom cut me off with a verbal slap. "No, Hannah. You're always clumsy, always ruining everything." Rebecca stood at the staircase, wearing a simple dress for the rehearsal dinner. I looked into her eyes, hoping for a word in my defense. But she looked away, avoiding my gaze. Her fiancé stood beside her, lips pressed together, not daring to intervene. The air felt thick, suffocating. And then the final blow came from Mom, cold and resolute. "The best gift you could give your sister's wedding is to disappear from this family." Dad nodded, his voice firm. "Yes, you don't belong here." It felt like my heart exploded. My ears rang, my eyes blurred with tears. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask why. But my throat closed up, leaving only a painful silence. I set the box of decorations on the floor. The sound echoed like a final note. I turned, walked out, and the door slammed shut behind me like a verdict. On the dark road back to my apartment, my world crumbled. I'd given everything to my family, and this was their response. But amidst the shock, a thought flickered, both terrifying and liberating. Maybe they were right. Maybe disappearing was the only gift I could give them. I don't know if you've ever felt rejected by the people you love most. It's like drowning, yet in that moment, a part of me began to rise to the surface. The story doesn't end here. What I chose next would force my family to face the truth they'd buried for years. And I, once a shadow, would have to find a way to step into the light. If you think my story is reaching an intriguing turning point, leave a comment with why. If you think it's not compelling enough, be honest and type N. The most bitter moment of my life was when I opened my phone and saw my family glowing on the wedding livestream. I sat alone in my small Asheville apartment, eyes glued to the screen, searching for any sign that someone noticed my absence. But there was none. Dad raised a toast, Mom smiled happily, and Rebecca shone in her stunning white dress. The hall was filled with applause, music, and laughter, and somewhere in that moment I realized my disappearance was the gift they'd wanted. My chest ached, but a strange new feeling stirred within me, a kind of awakening. If my presence only brought them shame, why was I still holding on? If everything I did was meaningless to them, maybe disappearing wasn't a punishment but the only way for me to be free. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the dim yellow light casting shadows on piles of papers, rent contracts, utility bills, work documents. I knew if I was going to disappear, it had to be thorough. Not just running away for a few days, but rebuilding my entire life. And I started with the most important step: cutting ties with Asheville. The next morning, I contacted a local real estate agency to sell my apartment. I knew I could have gotten a better price, but I accepted a loss for a quick sale. When I signed the papers, my hands trembled. 3 years of savings and effort amounted to so little, but handing over the keys felt strangely liberating. Next, I called my boss at the marketing company. I kept it brief. I'm resigning for personal reasons. He was shocked, tried to convince me to stay, but my mind was made up. I was done trapping myself in obligations just to be seen through someone else's lens. The most critical step was handling the joint accounts I shared with my parents. Most of the money in them came from me, used for Mom's medical bills or family expenses. I didn't want that money misused. So I reached out to Karen Mitchell, a lawyer I'd met at a workshop. I told her my story. She listened intently, then nodded. Hannah, you have every right to protect your hard work. We'll set up a trust fund, only dispersing with proper documentation. I nodded, feeling for the first time that someone was on my side. Signing the legal papers, I knew I was closing a chapter, not just financially, but emotionally. When everything was settled, I packed my old car with a few suitcases of clothes, my laptop, and the sapphire necklace I'd meant for Rebecca. I had nowhere to return to. I chose Charleston, South Carolina, a coastal city I'd once visited, with its charming old streets and salty sea breeze. I wanted to start over where no one knew who I was. The drive took hours. I cried, sang along to old songs on the radio. With every mile, I felt a weight lift from my heart. When I saw the Welcome to Charleston sign, I knew I'd entered a new world. I rented a small house by the Ashley River, an old wooden place with a gray shingle roof, newspaper-covered windows to block the wind, and a porch overlooking the shimmering water at sunset. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt I had a space where I wasn't judged or compared. To avoid scrutiny, I started working under the name Elaine Parker, using my middle name to create a new identity. I set up a small website taking on freelance marketing projects from strangers online. For the first time, I didn't worry about my parents' criticism or comparisons. Every contract, every thank you from a client was proof that I had value, that I wasn't the clumsy daughter they'd called me. Those early days in Charleston weren't easy. I was lonely, haunted by memories of Asheville, wondering if I'd been too extreme. But one morning, I walked into a small coffee shop called Saltwater Brew and met Maria, the owner, with a warm smile. She was about 40, with curly hair and kind eyes. When I ordered a cappuccino, she grinned. "You look like someone new to town." Tidewater, Charleston, it's a good place to start over. Her words touched my heart like a gentle breeze. Maria didn't need to know my past. To her, I was just a person trying to rebuild. From that day, I visited the shop often, chatting with her. She didn't pry, but her encouragement and every cup of coffee she handed me made me feel like I was finding my place. Evenings, I'd sit on my porch listening to the crickets, watching the moonlight dance on the Ashley River. I'd open my laptop, work on new projects, and feel a sense of peace. I was no longer forced to be anyone's shadow. I was writing my own story, one step at a time. Sometimes I wondered, if my family knew where I was, would they care? Would they realize I didn't disappear to hurt them, but to live authentically? Then I'd let it go. For the first time, the question, what do they think, was no longer a chain holding me back. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. Leaving Asheville, selling my apartment, quitting my job, setting up the trust, and moving to Charleston wasn't running away. It was rebirth. I was no longer Hannah the Shadow. I was becoming Elaine Parker, someone who dared to choose her own light. And I had a feeling. This journey wasn't over. Because once you step out of the shadow, the old world doesn't let you go easily. Challenges, confrontations, and buried truths would still come for me. But this time, I was ready. If you want to hear more stories like mine, or relate to the struggles I'm facing, check out my previous videos on this channel. There are messages you read that crush your heart, but your mind warns you not to trust them too quickly. That morning, I opened my old phone and saw a short text from Dad. "Mom's in the hospital. You need to come back now." I froze. For a moment, my heart wavered. I pictured Mom's pale face, her cold hands on a hospital bed. Memories of driving her to appointments, waiting hours in the ER, flooded back. I wanted to drive straight to Asheville, but then I paused. I remembered all the times they'd used Mom's health to pull me back. Once, it was just a minor dizzy spell, yet they called me mid-workday, forcing me to drop everything. I'd believed them, rushed over, only to find her sipping tea in the living room, healthy enough to scold me for being late. But this time, it felt different. I called my lawyer, Karen. Her voice was calm. "Hannah, I'll verify. Don't move yet. Let me contact the hospital." An hour later, she called back, her tone heavy. "The text from your dad is real. Your mom's in critical condition with severe nervous exhaustion and high blood pressure. She's in the ER at Mission Hospital, Asheville." Hearing that, a deep sadness settled in, but oddly, not the blind panic I expected. I knew I needed to help, but not by returning to the old cycle. "Karen," I said, "pay all her hospital bills from the trust. Make sure she has a good room, proper medication, and no financial stress." Karen paused, then replied softly, "You know, Hannah, this decision shows who you are. You still care, but you're protecting yourself from more pain." I set the phone down, feeling a mix of relief and heartache. I still loved Mom, even after she coldly told me to disappear. That love didn't vanish like a swipe on a screen. But I couldn't go back to be crushed again. In Asheville, news spreads fast in a small town. Nothing stays hidden long. A nurse close to the family let slip, "If Hannah hadn't paid the hospital bills, you all wouldn't have managed." That comment rippled like a stone in a still pond. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues started whispering. Why was the daughter they'd pushed away the one covering the bills? Why had they been so cold to her? At the local market, I heard some of Mom's old friends spoke bluntly. "Linda, you should be ashamed. Your daughter's the one holding this family together." Dad, Robert, always so proud, now walked with his head down at the accounting office. Colleagues who once admired his perfect family looked at him differently. And Mom, waking up in the hospital, must have heard the whispers. I imagined her lying there, tears falling not just from illness, but from the truth laid bare. Meanwhile, I sat in my small Charleston home, working on my laptop for a new client, a startup hiring me for online marketing. The steady tapping of keys, morning light streaming through the window, and cool Ashley River breeze made me feel freer than ever. Sometimes memories crept in, whispering, "Mom's suffering. Should you go back?" But I reminded myself, My presence was never their cure. I was just the target for their frustrations and favoritism. Now I was helping the only way I could, ensuring their care without stepping back into the fray. I stepped onto my porch, watching the river sparkle under the sun. For the first time in years, I felt I owed no one. I'd repaid them with the most humane act, even with my heart still scarred. A week later, Karen called. Hannah, the hospital bills are fully paid. The doctors praise the trust's efficiency, but your family still hasn't publicly acknowledged you. They're silent, letting people talk. I gave a bitter smile. Silence sometimes hurts more than accusations, but I knew silence was also an admission. I pictured Dad at night, sitting in an empty living room, replaying his words, disappear. I imagined Mom, exhausted, clutching a doctor's hand, whispering, "Why Hannah?" And Rebecca, back from her honeymoon, facing the community's probing eyes. The perfect sister, now compared to the sibling she'd dismissed, who saved the family. I knew I couldn't hide forever. One day they'd come for me. But unlike before, I was no longer the passive Hannah waiting for approval. I'd chosen to walk away, built a new life in Charleston, and I had the right to set my boundaries. At night, I sat on my porch, watching the city lights reflect on the water. I wondered, would this truth change them? Or would they keep hiding, making excuses? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I'd never go back to being their shadow. Have you ever imagined the family you ran from suddenly showing up at your new home where you're trying to start over? I thought it was just a nightmare, until that afternoon. I'd just finished an online meeting with a client, my laptop still open on the table. The Ashley River breeze rustled my notes. Then came a knock at the door. I thought it was a neighbor or delivery, but when I opened it, my heart stopped. There stood Rebecca, her face pale, eyes red from crying. Behind her was Dad, Robert, his tall frame stooped as if carrying an invisible weight, and Mom Linda, still frail, leaning lightly on Dad's arm for balance. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. My small Charleston porch became the stage for a confrontation I'd avoided. "Hannah," Rebecca spoke first, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." I silently opened the door, gesturing them inside. My heart churned, but outwardly, I stayed calm. This was the difference between the old Hannah the Shadow and me now. My small living room had only an old second-hand sofa. They sat, and for minutes no one spoke. Only the ticking clock broke the silence. Rebecca lowered her head, scrolling through old texts between us on her phone. I caught a glimpse of the screen's light reflecting on her face. She whispered, "You sent me so many messages. You tried so hard. I never read them all." Her voice broke. I didn't respond. I wanted to hear them out. Dad, Robert, spoke next. The man who prided himself on never being wrong sounded hoarse. "Hannah, I know the community's talking. They say if it weren't for you, your mom wouldn't have made it. I I can't deny it anymore. I was wrong." He bowed his head. For Robert Collins, that was like a mountain bending. Mom, Linda, stayed silent for a long time. She looked at me, her tired eyes filled with regret. When she spoke, her voice was faint. "The doctors said, if it weren't for you, we wouldn't have managed. Hannah, why did you still help after everything I said?" Her question pierced my chest. I wanted to shout, "Because I'm still your daughter!" But I held back. I knew if I let emotions take over, I'd fall back into the old cycle. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "Because I didn't want to carry the guilt of abandoning you. But that doesn't mean I'll let myself be trampled again." The air grew heavy. I looked at them, for the first time not shying away. "If you want me in your lives, learn to respect me," I said firmly. Rebecca broke down, tears streaming down her face, staining her simple dress. I knew she was facing the truth. I'd sacrificed so much for her and she'd stayed silent too long. Dad fidgeted, his hands clenching and unclenching, unsure where to rest. He wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Mom just looked at me, her lips trembling. Her eyes held a mix of remorse, pity, and helplessness. She didn't cry, but those eyes were heavier than any tears. We sat like that for a long time. No one knew what to say next. My heart pounded, but it no longer trembled like before. I stood in a new place, not begging for recognition but setting boundaries for my life. Finally, Rebecca whispered, "Hannah, I'm sorry." Those 3 words echoed in the small room. I'd dreamed of hearing them 1,000 times, but when they came, I didn't feel satisfied, just empty. I nodded slightly, saying simply, "An apology only means something if it comes with change." The meeting ended in silence. They left my small house, their eyes heavy. Before stepping out, Mom looked back, as if wanting to say something, but stopped. When the door closed, I sank into the sofa, my body shaking, not from fear, but from the tension that had just passed. I'd done what the old Hannah never dared, faced them directly, calmly, and set terms for respect. That night, I sat on my porch, the cool Ashley River breeze soothing me. I watched the city lights dance on the water, feeling a mix of emotions. I felt for Mom, pitied Dad, and ached for Rebecca. But I was also proud of myself. I was no longer weak. I knew this was just the beginning. One confrontation doesn't heal wounds overnight. There would be more challenges, more struggles. But I'd laid the first foundation for change. Some afternoons seem ordinary but become milestones that close a chapter. That day, Charleston's sky turned a soft orange, the setting sun gilding the Ashley River. I was on my porch, sipping tea, when I heard a knock. My heart sank slightly. I had a feeling. My family, they were back. Opening the door, I saw Rebecca first. Her face was gaunt, eyes shadowed from too many tears. Behind her was Dad, Robert, looking aged, his gray hair drooping, no trace of his usual pride, and Mom, Linda, still weak, her eyes no longer cold but hesitant, fragile. Silence enveloped us. I stepped back, inviting them in. This time I wasn't trembling. I walked calmly, leading them to the porch where the river breeze blew freely, and old wooden chairs sat neatly. This was my space, and I wanted them to know I was no longer an outsider in their home. We sat. Rebecca clutched her hands, then spoke the words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. "Hannah, I'm sorry. Sorry for staying silent too long. When you were humiliated, I stood by and watched. I took the favoritism and let you carry everything. I was wrong." Tears rolled down her cheeks, dripping onto her arm. I looked at her, feeling a mix of pain and relief, but I stayed quiet, letting her continue. Dad, who never admitted fault, bowed deeply, his voice rough. "I was wrong, Hannah. I put false pride and the image of a perfect family above love. I feared others' judgment more than your feelings. I lost you for too long." I stared, stunned. For the first time, he wasn't the stern man with cold eyes. He was just a father, old and pleading for a chance. Then Mom. She said nothing at first, only reached out with trembling hands to grasp mine. Tears fell, hot on the back of my hand. She choked out, "My daughter, I'm sorry." That moment, my heart trembled, like a string struck perfectly. All these years, I'd waited for those 2 words. Now I had them. But I also knew forgiveness couldn't come instantly. I took a deep breath, speaking calmly. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's giving others a chance to make amends, but only if I don't lose myself again. If you want me in your lives, you have to learn to respect me. My words rang clear, resolute. I saw Rebecca nod through tears. Dad sighed, as if releasing a burden. Mom squeezed my hand, not letting go. No one spoke for a long while. We sat together, watching the river glow in the sunset. I knew there was still distance between us, scars that wouldn't heal easily. But today, a door had cracked open. I didn't promise to return to Asheville. I didn't promise things would go back to how they were. But I promised myself I'd never live in anyone's shadow again. I was Hannah, and I deserved to be seen for who I am. As they left, I walked them to the door, sensing a change in their eyes, no longer dismissive or avoidant, but a cautious acknowledgement. That alone felt like a long step on my healing journey. Night fell, and I returned to my porch, settling into my familiar wooden chair. The Ashley River breeze carried the scent of salt and the whisper of waves. I closed my eyes, letting the air touch my skin, feeling at peace. I realized forgiveness wasn't a gift for them, it was for me. It didn't erase the past but let me move forward lighter. And most importantly, forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was my way of saying I was strong enough to set boundaries, yet kind enough not to let my heart turn to stone. Writing this story, I realized the most painful journeys can lead to growth. I lived in others' shadows, craved recognition, and was rejected by my own family. But through it all, I learned my worth doesn't lie in others' eyes, but in how I protect and value myself. This story isn't just about favoritism or family wounds, it's about the power of forgiveness. Not forgetting or accepting more pain, but opening a door for amends, keeping your heart from hardening, and giving others a chance to change. If you've ever felt like I did, overlooked, undervalued, remember you deserve respect and love. And if this story resonates with you, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, and let's walk together on more journeys of humanity.